too small, and no project is really too large. A lot of times what will end up having is sort of groups getting together, and I've got one vehicle and my neighbor community has one vehicle and the community next to them has two vehicles, and maybe they want to get together and actually submit one single application that includes 4 or 5 vehicles for 2 or 3 communities. And you know, don't be afraid to work in that direction. We've found that that's been pretty successful. On paper, you know, your emission reduction potential looks a lot stronger because of that, because it's just more vehicles. And I know up here in Northwest Indiana, in particular, there are a lot of small towns sort of scattered around, and they can't do 5 vehicles. And maybe they don't feel like their project is worth anything because it's only 1 vehicle. Well, if your neighbor community has 1 vehicle and the one down the road does 2, you know, suddenly it's a 3, 4, 5 vehicle program. So don't be afraid to partner with folks.
All right, thank you, Sean. We are back live, as we understand it. And for those of you that have camera issues, I apologize, but as we mentioned during our brief pause, this gives value to us to be able to see what are raised, questions that are raised throughout the public meetings being held around the state. Kathy tells me that those of you whose name I call will need to come up and stand in the vicinity of the state flag so that your smiling face can be seen by all. So Terry Butler, please come forward and introduce yourself again, please, and your comments.
My name is Terry Butler. I'm Transportation Director for School City of Hammond, but I'm here to represent the school bus industry as a general group. We've actually tried to put a small committee together with the business managers, transportation directors, and the state, which I'm also on the state school bus committee for the IDOE. And then because I'm a glutton for punishment, I'm also the president of the school board for the School City of Hobart. But we'd like to have consideration. The school bus industry in the state, because of funding, has been hit pretty hard. We have buses, it's mandatory that we keep buses for 12 years. We're running buses, I know my personal is over 15 years old. And there are districts that have buses that are 18 years old. Here in Northwest Indiana, as with every group that there is, our equipment cannot hold up the same as equipment, say, in Evansville, strictly due to weather. So we just like to have consideration for the school bus industry. There are thousands of school buses on the road. There's another school district that we'll be talking here. They've already committed to propane, and he's going to talk a little bit about those benefits. But that's something that a lot of the school systems are looking at, along with this CNG, although the infrastructure in the CNG is pretty expensive for a school district. But that's my comments. We just wanted to throw our hat in the ring.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, Robert Garcia.
So my name is Robert Garcia. I'm the Director of Transportation for School City of East Chicago. And just like Mr. Butler said, we would like to have most of that to go to public schools. I think that's the biggest need. We transport these kids, you know, to and from home. But I think the biggest need we have is for the public school system. You know, we're the first school in Northwest Indiana. We got 6 propane buses that we invested in. We had them for about 10 months. Right now we use probably 15,275 gallons of propane, which is the savings $23,000 just in 10 months. And just with 6. I think that'll grow as our fleet gets bigger. The other cost savings also is that propane bus only uses 7 quarts of oil. Diesel is taking 7 gallons. So there's a lot of savings there when you get into it. But I have some other things written down here but it's just more of a cost saving. 40 to 50% less on diesel fuel than diesel fuel. Districts could expect between $2,000 and $2,500 just on regular maintenance. Just like the oil filters also is 60% less than the diesel fuel. Also 50% of us, 80% vehicle fuel by propane is auto gas. emits 80% fewer small producing hydrocarbons and virtually eliminates particulate matters when compared to diesel. But there's a huge difference. You know, propane buses create up to 20% less NOx, up to 60% less carbon monoxide, up to 24% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than diesel fuels. If everybody knows in Chicago, we're an industrial city. We got Mattel, the biggest steel producer in the world. We got BP Amoco. They just made a $3 billion investment to convert sand tars into oil, which is a dirty process. We got many industries in our area, but the school city of Chicago has been committed to go green. Like I said, we invested for investment in 6 propane buses, and we like to grow to emit less pollutants in the air. So that's what I'm.
Thank you. David Wright.
Yeah, David, keep yourself slightly around there, kind of where It's actually more about sound.
Gotcha. Yeah. Sure, okay. David Wright from the Gary Public Transportation Corporation. I've got about 5 or 6 comments. I didn't write them down, so I'll be brief. Northwest Indiana is afflicted by industrial and transportation resources, as Kay knows, and the project priorities should reflect that by, 1, acknowledging that the bus category impacts both industrial and transportation issues. The prioritization should further acknowledge that some projects actually have benefits under the hood. A new transit vehicle, for instance, cleans the air as well as takes vehicles off the street. Now, the emissions calculations I'm recommending should be allowed to reflect that. Alternative fuels should have a priority, or some priority. An agency should be allowed to identify a replacement plan over a 4-year period for a single application. That's to address Frank Rosado's question, to reduce the need for piecemeal applications. If 4 vehicles are needed, but buying them all at one time really won't help, or actually will present a problem in the future, there should be a replacement plan allowed for 2 vehicles now and maybe 2 vehicles a year or 2 later. Further financial impacts should be considered. For instance, can this investment of that project actually help partner agencies? And this is a way to switch funding streams to maybe free up additional funding for secondary projects. And maybe there should be a narrative allowed in the application process to allow for that. For instance, if GPTC and the Chicago Transit purchase vehicles from this program, it's possible that additional smaller transit agencies can use the money freed up to buy even more vehicles. So there could be even more vehicles purchased with the investment in transit vehicles. Lastly, further social environmental justice impacts should be part of the prioritization process. Environmental justice, quality of life, and mobility impacts. And that's about it.
The last card I have, which doesn't have to be the last one, but Carl Lissick, please.
Well, good evening, everybody. I just want to say, I want to thank the advisory committee and Sean for coming up here, but sometimes we forget to say thank you for volunteering to be on this and being appointed by the governor, but sometimes, great. I appreciate everybody being here today. It shows support for Northern Indiana here on clean air initiatives. And so we're really excited about this opportunity to be here tonight and to work with all of you on bringing cleaner air initiatives and reducing NOx emissions here in Northern Indiana. So South Shore Clean Cities is a 501c3 nonprofit organization with the U.S. Department of Energy designated Clean Cities Coalition that we assist public, local, regional, state units of government, businesses and nonprofit groups with on-road and off-road fleet emission reduction strategies and analysis. We accomplish these efforts in part through our work in the Northern Indiana Green Fleet Program in cooperation with 2 Northern Indiana Metropolitan Planning Organizations. They are Northwestern Indiana Regional Planning Commission, the host of this meeting, NERPC, and the Michiana Area of Council of Governments, MACOG. South Shore Clean Cities also serves as the co-chair on the, with IDEM on the Indiana Clean Diesel Coalition for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and for Region 5, the Midwest Clean Diesel Coalition. Since our inception, since June of '99, South Shore Clean Cities has built a long history of regional, state, and federal partnerships which have provided nitrogen oxides and other emission reduction opportunities, educational and financial incentives for numerous on-road and off-road equipment that has assisted northern Indiana with dramatically improved air quality. South Shore Clean Cities recognizes a unique opportunity through the Indiana's funding allocation from the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. We are thrilled Governor Holcomb saw fit to designate the Indiana Department of Environmental Management as the lead agency for the administration of this extremely important program. South Shore Clean Cities and our board of directors, our stakeholders, which are you, recognizes today's listening session as the first step in IDEM's preparation and implementation of this best management practice, which will guide the state in utilizing funds to mitigate NOx emissions from mobile sources. South Shore Clean City respectively submits the following comments. Northern Indiana is responsible for a proportion share of statewide air pollution burden. Therefore, South Shore Clean Cities recommends that priority be given to NOx emission projects occurring in these geographical areas. To accelerate the market adoption of electric vehicles in Indiana, South Shore Clean Cities also recommends that 15% maximum funding allowable to be allocated to electric vehicle supply equipment. And South Shore Clean Cities recommends that mitigation projects be based on the potential to reduce NOx emissions regardless of the fuel or technology. We encourage the use of federally recognized quantitative resources such as the Alternative Fuel Life Cycle, Environmental, and Economic Transportation, or AFLE tool, which Sean had recently mentioned, and also comparison NOx emissions by vehicle type, and that demonstrates total cost of ownership as well as the EPA, US EPA diesel emission quantifier. To take full advantage of the Indiana's funding allocation, South Shore Clean City recommends cost share requirements be maximized for all projects. Additionally, we suggest that NOx emission actions for all eligible areas be considered both public and private, include projects in marine applications, public port and private freight switchers, Class 4 through 8 school, shuttle, and transit buses, Class 4 through 7 local freight trucks, Class 8 local freight trucks. South Shore Clean Cities is not providing regarding specific projects at tonight's listening session. However, we are gathering the information from you, our stakeholders, and will provide our findings prior to the public comment deadline of March 31st, 2018 to IDEM. We remain committed to improving air quality in Indiana and sincerely thank all of you for the opportunity to provide this comment. So thank you.
Valerie, were there any other cards provided to you? Miss Brenda.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda Sky Henry. I'm the Director of Green Urbanism and Environmental Affairs for the City of Gary. And I just want to add just one comment. If you know me, any of you know me, I like to maximize whatever contributions that we can get in our community. So I'm hopeful that the advisory group will take into consideration an opportunity to maximize your investment, particularly in environmental justice communities like Gary, Hammond, and Chicago. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Any additional comments that folks might want to make from the floor, or additional questions that you may have thought of? This is not a public hearing, so we can be a little bit more flexible if there are questions that you thought of. Jeff?
Jeff Benson, Duluth Learning Center. Do the diesel vehicles need to replace? So that's a question for you.
Right, I think you're
Can you repeat it?
Right, I think your question, if I'm following, your question is, when we're talking about vehicle replacement projects, do you need to destroy the previous vehicle? Is that where you're going?
Replace it, yeah. So you have to have one to replace it.
Well, yes, you have to have one to replace it. And it sort of builds, if you will, it builds on the concept of DERA, which was to sort of accelerate clean diesel into the marketplace. Not necessarily add to the fleets, but accelerate the clean diesel into the market. So yes, you would have to have a vehicle to replace. Yes.
As a follow-up to that, some of the material I read earlier, it inferred that you would basically take the old vehicle that will replace it, take it out of service and destroy it? You destroy the engine?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what I will say, and I'll only mention this because I know Valpo is in the room, and we did something like this in Valpo, and I use this example as something to consider when you're looking sort of across your little region, if you will, here where you've got neighboring communities. We did a replacement project with a refuse hauler in Valpo. They ended up having the refuse hauler that they had was actually newer and better than a neighboring community's existing vehicle. So they basically deeded that one over to Community 2, and Community 2 destroyed their vehicle and took their vehicle out of service. From our standpoint, that is still a replacement project. We've moved one kind of next door, but it's all because it's very much within a tight confined area. Because I can't remember who the community was, but I mean, we're talking like just a few miles down the road. It's not like 25 miles down the road community. That would be a little bit harder to sell, so to speak. But that's something that we try to maintain flexibility in the program where we can, and things like that are examples.
If we are replacing a federally funded vehicle, basically one that was financed by the Federal Transit Administration of the federal government, they may have guidelines on how that vehicle is taken out of service. And is there going to be enough flexibility so that we don't get in trouble for doing that?
I think that's a conversation we'll have to have as a part of that second phase, because those are types of projects that have not happened a great deal in Indiana. And with that in mind, that's a part of a learning process for us as well. Yes?
Sean, could you talk a little bit about this not being a federally funded program? Can you comment on that?
From the standpoint of matches, I think is why this matters. I mean, a lot of folks will, if you're in the municipal world, you know that there are often congestion mitigation air quality funds, CMAQ funds, that are available for a lot of different project types. You cannot match CMAQ dollars with other federal dollars. These Volkswagen funds are considered similar to supplemental environmental project funds. They are non-federal funds, so they can be used. So for example, if there is a CMAQ project that's an 80-20 split, it could theoretically be 80% CMAQ, 20% VW. Yes?
Yes, as I heard the word locomotive, I think it's unfair that a locomotive company, which is a $1 billion company, to be able to get this money. Here they a $1 billion company, and here we have municipalities and school cities that benefit more than a company that has a locomotive. And I think that it's totally unfair that you have a company that comes in and wants a locomotive. I know NERC in the past has given money. It might have been over $1 million to replace a locomotive, which I think if these are $1 billion companies that they should be able to buy their own locomotive. I think there should be more municipalities and more school cities that could go a long way with these monies. The engines that we use, it's Ford made, it's American made. Roush is another American made company that converts it into propane. Propane is made here in America also, so I think it's just a win-win situation for us if we keep it along those lines. But I vote no for locomotives.
Well, and I hear you. What I would say you should do is go ahead and submit that as a formal comment, because those, what I'm hearing is you have a very clear idea of where you would like to allocate the funds and prioritization. Those are the things we need to hear, so be sure to hit the website and give us that.
Sean, the CMAQ example was just an example, correct? I mean, you would have to, if you came up with using CMAQ projects, even at 80-20 split, that would have to take some type of priority on the list. The CMAQ project funding through all these other things during the development stage, right?
I'm going to say I don't understand what you mean by priority on the list.
Well, you have, during the development stage, you're looking at what some of these priorities are under the mitigation process. There's nothing that says anything about CMAQ projects.
Well, that's true. But what we're not, and what I would say in reply to that is, we will be looking at project types, not funding methods, not funding streams, project types. And there may be a little bit of confusion because DERA is seen as a funding method, but it really isn't so much a funding method as a diesel emission reduction program sponsored by EPA. Does that kind of get where you're going, Reggie?
Exactly.
Okay.
Sean, I'd like to follow up with Jeff. Did he answer your question adequately?
I think so.
It's, I somewhat interpreted your question from a charging station standpoint. Do they have to have a diesel car to take off the road type of thing?
Is that your question?
No.
Okay.
But again, Jeff Benson for the audio. So some of your funds are strictly diesel replacement vehicles, and some of them are more flexible, like potentially up to 15% for charging infrastructure, which is not replacing a diesel. It's replacing emissions.
Right, that is correct. I would only tweak the language to say not are, because we don't know where they will be. But yes, those are all equally eligible project types.
But if I wanted to buy a brand new propane bus, you might not, because you didn't specify alternative fuel funding, and it's not you, and you don't have them set, but the draft ones that were set.
Right, right, and if you've kind of opened an important concept here, and that is, this program is not intended to be diesel to diesel. It's not intended to be diesel to propane or CNG or electric. It's intended to replace a vehicle with whatever you all feel is the best use for your purpose. Some school systems think propane is the answer. Some school systems love electric concepts. It just depends on what your school system, and I'm using schools as an example. I know that's not relevant to you necessarily, but you see, so that, I think it's important to point that out, that even though none of the language talks about alternative fuels, they're all eligible as part of a vehicle replacement. Okay?
So, and I guess I'll put it into the comment, Terry Butler again. With the duty cycle we have on school buses in urban districts, it's created quite a few problems with the diesel, the newer generation diesels, with the, and I believe the garbage packers are doing the same thing with regeneration. And we're spending a lot of money on the systems because we just don't get hot enough for long enough. So that might be something to look at in the criteria when you're looking at the projects of what the duty cycles are. If somebody's running up and down I-65, they're probably having pretty good emissions, even on the newer vehicles. But the older vehicles, I think Robert's on the right track as far as getting away from diesel for school buses. They're coming out with gasoline buses and propane buses and CNG, and I think those are actually, for that type duty cycle, is probably going to work better.
Okay.
I promise this is my last comment.
No, that's what we're here for.
But yeah, I just go back to what's going to have the greatest impact in the community. Here you got a locomotive that goes along the track. Here you got a school bus that goes into communities, is going to schools, and everybody's exposed to. And I got a child riding a diesel fuel bus may be exposed 23 to 46 times the cancer rates than those who don't. So I think you got to, when you prioritize it, what has the greatest impact that's going to impact, in the community, throughout the whole community, kids and schools and everything. But I think it's a greater impact.
Any other questions from the audience? I'll look to my two fellow commissioners. Were there any points that were raised that you want clarification on or additional comments?
I would just invite comments from any of you that will help us as we move down the program and we face applications for competing projects that may be the same nature, but they're from different parts of the state or different demographic groups. I would be interested to know how you think we should determine the award of those things. Should we consider the number of school children in the school system versus, or the number of, the length of, the average length of school bus rides, if it's gonna be school buses that kids are exposed to versus short rides versus long rides, or whatever factors that may go into this, what, as we try to compete, make decisions about competing projects, what should be the committee's criteria for making those decisions? It should be the maximum reduction in NOx emissions. Should it be the maximum impact on people? Should it be the ages of the people that are going to be affected by it? Should we pay more attention to reducing it for children than we do for older adults? All those kinds of things. But we would welcome your input on those kinds of decisional methodologies that would help us out a lot.
Well said, Justice. Well said. Robert?
Just based on what you say there, like I said, I'm from East Chicago, Hammond and Gary, Northwest Indiana, all industrial. We live in a non-attainment area. And what that is that a lot of these companies don't have to follow the rules of the EPA. So they're allowed to produce more pollutants in the air. So I think that, that should be considered in that. And I don't know a lot of those areas or companies that do pollute a lot, but Northwest Indiana is a non-attainment area that allows these companies to pollute more than usual.
And those, I think those are the comments. Sorry, did you have one more thing?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, well, one of the criteria should be who the state recognizes as the pollution areas, and a way to do that would be on who has to have vehicle inspections, even though that's gasoline. They recognize that we're a highly polluting area, so that might be some target to spend money in those areas.
And a really interesting concept to kind of take sort of down the path is there are a lot of different ways to measure how an area is adversely affected as it relates to air quality. Tell us what you think are those ways that we should use as measures. I mean, that's what we're hearing here. That's what we want to hear. Those comments will help us kind of form some of the criteria as we get into that phase 2 piece as well. And I guess the last thing I would say, if there are no more comments or questions, is if you have provided a comment here, that's great. Hopefully we have it recorded, and it will be recorded in such a way. But we still encourage everyone to go ahead and hit that website and make those formal comments online so that we know that they are there with everybody else's comments. Were there any other parting shots from the crowd? Any other things here?
No, I think I thank everyone for coming this evening. I appreciate your comments, your questions. I think you've generated some thoughts for Sean and Valerie and John to take back to their offices and give some consideration to. I appreciate Justice Dixon, his comments with regards to spurning some ideas as to how to help us figure out the criteria for evaluating the projects. You were quiet. Did you have anything? You got nothing? Okay.
It's been said.
Okay.
That's right.
So, appreciate you all coming out this evening, and appreciate Sean and folks from Indianapolis driving up. Safe travels home when you go, be it tonight or tomorrow, and safe travels to everyone else here. And with that, we'll be adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Terry.